Welcome to NiCHE Conversations. I'm Jessica DeWitt, one of the editors at the Network in Canadian History and Environment. And today I am lucky to be joined once again by Carmen Gilmore. Can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. So like you, I'm based in Saskatoon and I live beside a remnant prairie. And I'm a parent and I'm into outdoor education, but I'm also an author and a writer. Yeah, so that's what brings me here, fuels my interest.
Yes. So you wrote a piece about this remnant. It was called Remnant, Urban Prairie Teaches Lessons in Loss. And this is for our Urban and Environmental Dialogue series that we published this month in collaboration with the Metropole, which is the blog for the Urban History Association. And so we're going to be discussing that today. Before we start, we're going to be talking about the Meewasin Valley Authority today. And I just wanted to, for transparency, let everyone know that I am on the Meewasin Conservation Advisory Committee. So this is a group of individuals who provide advice, constructive advice and feedback, etc., to the board and to the employees at Meewasin. So this falls right into line with that work. And so I found a lot of value in your piece, Carmen, and I'm excited to dig into it a bit more today. So I thought that we would start off, could you just tell us what the Saskatoon Natural Grasslands are, as well as how you found yourself involved in this space?
So if we go back 10,000 years, there was a bunch of glaciers moving across the prairie, which stretches, of course, from Saskatchewan all the way down to Texas. And of course, with, pioneer or settlement, a lot of that prairie has been lost to agriculture. So, so there's habitat loss and urban development. And so we have big pockets, I want to say, like at Grasslands National Park, right? That too is remnant prairie. And then we have these smaller pockets that are in urban areas or adjacent to urban areas that provide, these kind of showpieces to say, this is why it's important to keep these places alive, to conserve them. And they're also easy for families and schools to access, right? It's a lot easier to go to a park in your city or a conservation area near your city than to plan a field trip, get kids on a bus and go away for an overnight trip. So they have ecological value as well as educational value.
And you were volunteering at one point and were kind of really got on the ground by photographing wildflowers in the area. Yeah. I thought that was cool.
It's funny. I was like thinking back to when we moved into this neighborhood about 12 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like it was a place we didn't go because there's lots of ticks and we had kids, right? And then in summer and fall, it's just this beautiful place where, you can see some wildflowers and the changing. Yes. And then in winter, it becomes a totally different habitat where it's just, you can see these animal tracks. You see all these animals that are living there that you see in daylight, right? They're nocturnal or they're out of sight. But during the pandemic, I became interested in learning more. Like I was asking this question of how do I connect my kids to prairie ecology because I'm not from here. And as part of that, I realized, I could do a land acknowledgement about the Saskatoon Natural Grasslands, but I couldn't tell you anything about its history, which seems really weird, right? That, you do this thing that almost becomes performative then, rather than saying, I have a deep connection to this place. I live here. Now I've become a community steward by virtue of living here. So I had reached out to the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan, and I wanted to make this wildflower brochure. And I saw these beautiful examples on their website, and it was so hard because, I spent 2 summers looking for the wildflowers and I found some, right? But I was going for the original species inventory and I kept thinking, okay, like I'm failing at this. I'm an amateur. Like there's something wrong with me that I'm not quite finding them, or I've missed their early spring flowering and that's why I can't find them. But when I reached out to the Saskatoon Nature Society and I connected with Melanie Elliott, a retired outdoor educator who for 20 years did ecological education in the grasslands, I started to learn more about, the history that's not on a sign, right? And I realized that, this wasn't a Carmen failure. This, I am an okay botanist, amateur botanist. This was an institutional failure that I was seeing, right? And it was coming out in trying to make this beautiful, just taking these beautiful wildflower photographs.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that was such a simple but powerful way to talk about species loss, just like on the ground, like witnessing it, like
Yeah.
these plants actually aren't here, even though this is supposed to be a
Yes.
conserved patch of this grasslands. Um, so your piece really builds off of some scholarship that describes park creation as a museification of nature. So I thought maybe you could talk a bit about how Meewasin Valley Authority manages these grasslands as a kind of museum, so showpiece.
I have to say, like, I love talking to you because I always learn new terminology and ideas that, like, this museumification, I was like, oh, I haven't heard that. That's a really good way to describe it, though.
Mm-hmm.
The language that Meewasin uses, is clear that they think of the Saskatoon natural grasslands and many of these conservation areas as heritage institutions, right? And I quote
Yes.
directly in my article, right? I'm going to give this long quote right now where it's like, they said, since our region's natural history represents heritage just as much as does its human history and culture, preserving a piece of this original Saskatoon prairie landscape as a living outdoor museum deserves at least an equal priority with that of historical museums, art galleries, drama theaters, libraries, etc. End quote, right? Like, and I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's the same language they use when they talk about the Northeast Swale and Beaver
Yes.
Creek. And so there's this wonderful promise that maybe isn't fulfilled, right? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
when I think about the disconnect between the official story on their
Mm-hmm.
website, in their
Yeah.
brochure, and the signage, and how we talk about the space, and it's almost like it's frozen in time from 1993. But it's a habitat. It's not static. It continues to
Yes.
live and change, and it has deteriorated without the right conditions, which would have been doing the
Mm-hmm.
grazing and the controlled burns. Um,
Yes.
and what's so strange is that, like, even though it was the wildflowers that drew me in, and I think that that's pretty common, like, for people that can't tell a sedge from a grass, you're like, there's a pretty flower. I want to learn more.
Yes. Yes.
Saved for its fescue, right? So this was a native prairie grass that evolved with bison
Mm-hmm.
grazing, evolved with grass fire, and we needed the conservation authority to do those things. And there
Yeah.
was a breakdown, right? I don't dismiss that there's like limited resources, but in this habitat, we did not see that fulfillment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Meewasin has gotten better, I think, with that kind of thing, but this original grasslands was, saved a while ago. So, um, but I think it's pointing to a larger issue with all conservation in that it often wants to save a piece of land um, as it is at that point of time when it's
Mhm.
preserved or conserved.
Yeah.
And there isn't a lot of thought to the fact that these habitats will change.
Yeah.
For instance, where I grew up, I did my master's and part of my dissertation on this as well, is Cook Forest State Park. And the reason the park exists is the cathedral, which is the largest stand of old growth timber east of the Mississippi. But and there's just this idea that this forest cathedral, will exist forever,
Mhm.
but it doesn't take into the fact that trees die. It's the diseases are and invasive species are impacting hemlocks at a alarming rate, so they might be destroyed by that. Um, as well as like climate change, like these different factors that we don't care about the borders of a park, right? And the way that we think about parks right now doesn't really allow for that. Anyways, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking of
They're not.
those broader ideas, right? Like this is a piece of land that we look at to remember um, what it was
Yeah.
supposedly, right? But it actually isn't what it was, right? We have no ability of actually understanding what that space was like 100, 200, 500, 1,000 years ago, you know, yeah. And then that's where that museification comes in, right? So,
But I think
yeah.
that there's something more to it. And I did get to talk about this in the article where, you know, we hold, right? So we have these nonprofits, we have museums and archives and libraries, art galleries, and conservation zones kind of fit in that as well, where they're holding those irreplaceable resources for us, for the public.
Yes.
And well, I used the example in the article of the theft this fall in autumn 2025 at the Louvre, where, you know, there was accountability, there was
Yeah.
an investigation, the CEO tried to resign, and I thought what was so interesting as I read more that an audit showed that the Louvre had had the money to invest more in security upgrades, but they
Yeah.
hadn't, right? They
Yeah.
spent money on the flashy things instead of doing the actual hard work, maybe. You know, we need a secure facility that preserves these, in this case, it was jewelry, for future generations. And so I think about, like, again, like there's this dissonance where it's like, you know, if you think about going to Paris and you were going to go see the Mona Lisa at the Louvre and you walk down into the gallery and you're like, okay, there's just a blank wall. And
Yeah.
staff, well, wait a minute, like, where's the Mona Lisa? And they're like, no, it's on the wall. Just you can't see it, right? And that's an experience that I had with the Saskatoon Nature Society,
Yeah.
where Boston was like, you know, there is fescue here, but only we know where it is, and you can't see it. And it brought back the same thing, that feeling that I had with the wildflower brochure, where it was like, you know, I don't think this is a Carmen problem. I think this is maybe an institutional problem about being able to say, you know, this habitat, as you're saying about the Cathedral of Trees, it changed over time. And it's okay to say that, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
diminish the value of this space or the, I want to say, the learning in the community, or especially because of where we are, like being one of the few or only neighborhood I know that has a conservation zone, the
Yes.
community stewardship, right? But when you end up feeling like you were lied to, it's really hard to keep supporting a group, right?
Yeah. So that kind of rolls into like one of the points I wanted to get to today, which was like your concluding points about, you know, local conservationists and community members and the protection of grasslands going forward. Like you make, that's kind of like your concluding points argument. I thought it was quite powerful. And I wonder if you could share a bit more about the ways that locals are honoring their grief for this ecological loss, as well as, you know, planning steps forward.
Mm-hmm. So right now, I mean, it's so funny because the article really is about loss, and yet even as we've been planning the memorial, it really becomes about hope. You know, we're collecting photographs. Well, like if you have old photographs of the Saskatoon natural grasslands, we want to keep those. We want our community association to have those on their website so they can see this is what it was 25 years ago and this is what it is today, and it will continue to change. And I think that we shouldn't be frozen in time. That is a danger. It's static. And, you know, so we're planning this memorial for the Janes Walk weekend because we want to include as many community members across Saskatoon. But we're also, you know, along with having speakers about the challenges of urban conservation and how the grasslands has deteriorated, we're planning an art activity to invite families to come in and actually make of species that are no longer found here. So they'll be making like a ghost print of a species that is now a ghost in this habitat, which I think is a pretty powerful way to talk to kids about this. And as we hope to include the local schools, right, like we're talking about a generational loss, right? And I think that we can do that in a way that isn't sad and scary. We can say, you know, this sucks, but now we know how to do better as long as those.
Yeah. So that's going to be this year's Jane Walk?
This year's Jane looks Jane
That's
Walk.
awesome.
Yeah.
I hope I can go to that. I went to the
In May 1st.
the Richard Barb St. Barb afforestation area. They had a Jane Walk last year, and I learned about that space for the first time. Actually, even in over a decade of living here. Wait, just under a decade of living here. I hadn't been there yet, so I love the Jane Walks. That's cool.
And it's because you're hearing from the people that are experts in it, right?
Yeah, and like have an investment in that space. Like I think the connection to place is such an important thing, and something that you're talking about in this piece and stuff, and that like that's really this. I also appreciate you talking about hope, and I do think that as I get more into eco grief or ecological, like emotional ecologies, etc., there often with the negative emotions there is always this like this hope, because like yeah, looking to
They
the
go
future.
side by side, really.
They do, yeah, and the realism that you're representing, um yeah, yeah. um
So I had messaged because I think
yeah.
it's wonderful that you're on this advisory committee, and it's really inspiring to see, you know, a well-spoken woman who understands environmental history that is trying to
Mhm.
make a difference. And so I was really excited to have this conversation with you. But I had also asked in advance, of course, if I
Yeah.
could do some questions because we share this city, right? We, you know,
Mhm.
are likely to meet on the same trails, right, with our kids.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I was curious to ask you, Jessica, as you know, as a Saskatoon resident, how do you feel about the disconnect between what is showcased in conservation sites and the facts on the ground?
Yeah. So this is a great question, and one that is really shaped by how much I have studied parks and conservation spaces. So it's kind of a contradiction in that I love parks and I'm very involved in them. I love visiting them. I'm involved in this like I'm involved in Meewasin. Like I'm fully committed to these things, but also I'm highly critical of them. Um, and I think that the problem with our current systems, capitalism, property, colonialism, uh, racial, racism, white supremacism, because I think that does play into these pieces of land they're very much so. Um, is that there does not exist pure preservation in our world or in our systems as we have it right now, right? So a piece of land is never conserved, is never set aside for just to be.
Yeah,
There's always a catch to it, right? It has to make money in some way.
yeah.
And that's the problem, right? So Meewasin is a nonprofit. So they're constantly having to prove themselves worthy of more money to do the work that they are doing. And they are doing good work, but they're not doing enough work, just like any
Mhm.
nonprofit. But of course, if the nonprofit was doing enough work, then we wouldn't need them, right?
Yeah.
So that's the nonprofit industrial complex there. So like clinging to these narratives for Meewasin or any national park or what have you, they have to, in some ways, in order to prove their worthiness for more funding.
Mhm.
And then, in order to get more funding, they have to prove, so for instance, the idea of having an urban national park in Saskatoon. We have to show that Meewasin gets millions of visitors every year. What does millions of visitors mean? Money,
Mhm.
right? And if we are an urban national park and you give us more money, then we will make more money for the city. Like it's just this perpetual, um, uh, just you're on this wheel, right? And it never fully prioritizes conservation or
Yeah.
preservation. It can't, because you always have to be at some level prioritizing human engagement and human profit. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know what's funny is
Um,
I think about like different ecological sites in Saskatchewan that did not become Parks Canada sites, right?
yeah.
That were by Saskatchewan residents, naturalist ecologists, like the
Mm-hmm.
sand dunes, which because of their distance, right? So they're very far up north, so they don't
Mm-hmm.
have visitors, where that ecological integrity comes first, I think, right?
Yeah.
Rather than tourism or the visitors. And I think
Yeah.
that, I don't know, just because you bring up the National Urban Park, like I think about all this money is going to go to conserving these remnant prairie pieces that are already deteriorating. And when I look at groups like, I think it's the Conservation Society, where they identified the key biodiversity areas. So these are the habitats and the species that need preserving, and there's no money for that. So
Yeah.
it's like we become even more endangered because we're going to do, instead of the actual hard work of conservation, like the Louvre, we're going to do the fancy, let's on it, let's put a new sign on it, instead of the, do we want those species to survive? Did we want them to have habitat? Because those millions of dollars directed to that habitat conservation would have made a difference, right?
Absolutely.
Anything that you're saying, like, I totally agree with, like, it is a systemic issue. It is not a Jessica or Carmen issue. It is
Yeah, no, and that's good points. That, like, I always say that, like the sand dunes or what have you, it's a lot easier to prioritize preservation or indigenous led conservation if white people aren't going to visit it, right? If you don't have like the tourism, like if it's not developed for tourism yet, it's easier to be like, okay, yeah, you can have that piece of land. You can manage this national park the way you want, because there aren't as much funds coming in. And then I think Parks Canada has gotten a bit better, but in a large part, I think it was very performative, because the only way to truly involve Indigenous people would be land back. To dissolve the national parks, give the land back. So I think you touch upon that, and I'm always trying to learn from Indigenous folks and understanding land back initiatives, what that would mean, because truly it is a systemic problem, and there isn't room for like the perfect way forward in this like nonprofit preservation, conservation, prioritizing of recreation, all this. It's just like, it's so complex and such a mess.
It's very complicated, but I would argue that, like, when we think about the whole reason of doing these national urban parks in a way was to to meet that 30% of our land and 30% of our water, right? Like, to meet that, we could easily meet that by investing in, I want to say, like the Seal River watershed up in northern Manitoba, right? Where Indigenous groups have led the preservation of that area. And then there's been pushback, right? From the tourism operators, from, the Manitoba Wildlife Society. So the example exists there. It's not impossible. And I would argue that the Seal River watershed would be far more effective in doing conservation than in Saskatoon renaming ourselves as a national urban park, right? Like, if that was actual goal of like, let's preserve 30% of our land and water for these future generations. And that would just be maybe my closing question for you, Jessica, just about like, like, how do you feel, like, as a parent, how do you feel that we actually are protecting nature for the next generation? Like, talking about conservation, we're trying so hard, we're admitting that it's not always like a success story, but we're the generation now that the stewards, we're going to hold that candle for a minute, and then we're going to pass it on to the next generation.
It's hard to imagine that NiCHE or any preservation plan is going to succeed without like significant changes at the city and provincial level. Like, for those not in Western Canada, like, sprawl is an issue here, Calgary, Edmonton, and you just see it every year. We're just sprawling further and further into the prairie. I think like the infill bylaws and stuff that went through a year or two ago will help with like building more inside the city, because we have a lot of space inside of the city that is not well used. So one thing I just feel very to witness the unthought out sprawl of the city leaves me with a very negative feeling for the future. And thinking like there's there's plans for maybe another highway southeast of the city that's gonna, like impact Meewasin lands. I can't remember the exact plans at the moment, but anyways, there's just it's hard to see. Yeah, it's hard to see a future where things are going super well.
Yeah.
Just because the people in power who profit off of it not going well, are, they're making more money off of these kind of things than they are from conserving land, right? So, so I feel a bit pessimism for the future. At the same time, I don't feel like completely like dystopian about it. It just is what it is, right? And so working to do the best that I can, and also to just like instill in my daughter an understanding of these things and a love for the outdoors, etc., so that she can be a steward of the land going forward, as well as just I don't know, I'm rambling now. But
it resonates what you're saying though about teaching the next generation that this is what stewardship looks like. And community involvement is like our secret weapon, right?
Yes.
Like you live next to a place, you care about it, and it builds community, right? And that volunteer effort creates meaning. So then you care more, right? Like it becomes that virtuous cycle.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like how frustrating it is. Like we can't even get people in the city to like support bike lanes. So it's like if people were actually like on board as well, like if there was a large contingent of the city fighting for conservation, then we would have the power, right? Yeah. But there isn't that, right? So it's like always working in the community, right? Like you're doing with this grassland that you live on the edge of, like I'm trying to do by being a part of Meewasin in this way, just like fighting for more acknowledgements, for more people to like to understand and to have like a commitment to this place. And I think that's where, like, I think, I often think land acknowledgements are performative, but I think teaching people to like acknowledge the land on a daily basis, to be committed to this place, to this piece of land, to understand how you are impacting it, that you are responsible for its health, that you can't just depend on Meewasin or the federal government or the city government to do these things for you. You need to be doing them, right? And I think that's how I feel about not just conservation, but all initiatives, social justice, like more citizen engagement on all fronts will only make things better and will put pressure on the people who are running these systems to change them, even slightly.
To make it better. Can I tell you one more hopeful thing before we go?
Yes.
After the article came out, I just, sometimes these things land in your inbox. And so one thing that just made me smile was that in Peru, they have granted legal rights, the legal rights of nature, of personhood, to insects, specifically stingless bees, right? And so they have the fundamental right to exist and live in a healthy environment without pollution. And so I was thinking about, how I said, what if the grasslands had the rights of nature, right? Stewardship was built into the resource management plan, but I wondered if we've gone about it the wrong way. And just as you said about the highway and the sprawl, if we were saying, for example, like at Wanuskewin, where we've given these bison the legal rights of personhood, and everything else about them having space, they have protection from people, they have healthy prairie ecosystems kind of flow out from that, right? It actually makes a stronger case, I think, than fighting. Then the developer is the one who has to go to court and say, well, this is why we want to override these rights of these bison, right? And so I wonder, and I understand that the coexistence of humans with bison, I mean, indigenous people managed it for millennia,
Mhm.
We have a real attitude problem with that, but it's not impossible either.
Yes. Yeah,
And that
absolutely.
could be one way to say, you know what, they
Mhm.
were here first and they've come back and they have the rights of personhood. So that highway that
Mhm.
you want, it's going to have to go around,
Yeah.
right? Like the exception is finally forcing, maybe the
Mhm.
opposition to have to adapt, as you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I think rights of personhood um, to animals, to rivers, to etc. is a really um, brilliant way forward that's being led by Indigenous people where you're working within these legal systems,
Yeah.
but kind of turning them on their head a little bit.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
um,
It's an exciting thing to think, well, why couldn't we do that here too?
yeah.
Right? There's so many people that care. There's so many people I think that are like, we could do better. Is that
Mhm.
maybe another way forward?
Yeah. Yeah. And putting those, because we're so entrenched in these rights and property and blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And then this, like, taking those things that we understand humans have, right? And just like putting them in that, getting people to think about other life forms,
Hmm.
beings, pieces of land, etc. In that way, it helps people think about conservation in a different way, I think,
Yeah.
and kind of grab hold of that. Um,
Maybe makes a land acknowledgement really come home,
yeah,
right? Because if we
yeah,
do land back, then maybe this is
mm-hmm.
something that we can do.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you once again
Well,
for the conversation. It's
yeah, this was great,
beautiful.
Carmen. Thank you. A delight to talk about our home city and the natural lands inside of it. It is a
Mhm.
beautiful city. People don't understand. Come visit Saskatoon. It's great.
Yeah. There's so much history here. You just have to work for it here, right? You have
Yes. Yeah.
to take the time to learn. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thanks for joining me, Carmen. Take care.
Thanks so much. Bye for now.
Bye.